The last sound Corporal Hiroshi Tanaka heard before the train doors slammed shut was rhythmic. It was the almost philosophical clanging of Soviet steel on Soviet rail. Unlike the sturdy rumble, it lacked the precise, comforting metric of Japanese engineering and was a brutal, disorganized sound. This clank, thud, clank echoed the sudden, horrifying disorder into which his world had plunged. Hiroshi had believed, truly believed, that the war was over. And he remembered the moment his superior, Captain Sato, had delivered the news hours after the Emperor's broadcast, with a face of granite. Sato had said the word surrender, as if pronouncing a death sentence on his own soul for Hiroshi. The initial shock gave way to a weary yet structured relief, because the fighting had ceased. The brutal, sweltering, desperate fighting had ceased. But surrender must be executed with protocol. He and the remnants of the 14th Infantry Detachment had therefore surrendered brilliantly. Their rifles cleaned, and their uniforms immaculately folded, they presented themselves to the unit. They bowed so deep it threatened spinal injury, and prepared for the shame and for the mockery. They prepared for the inevitable repatriation to a homeland where their mere survival was an insult. What they had not prepared for was the Russians, and the Americans lacked aesthetic appreciation. They were interested only in logistics, which dictated a quick transfer to a holding facility. The Soviets were, according to the American logistics officer, terribly efficient at clearing the mess. Hiroshi now realized that Soviet efficiency meant being packed shoulder to shoulder in a cattle car. They were stripped of everything valuable, including a sentimental, if slightly chipped, porcelain tooth. A Soviet private mistook it for a genuine pearl and subjected them to a 2-week journey north. Corporal whispered Private Kenji, whose breath instantly crystallized in the air between them. I believe we may have crossed the Arctic Circle several days ago, and my toes have ceased to register. Nonsense, Private Hiroshi hissed back, using his knees to maintain the strict 15-centimeter gap. The Emperor's service is absolute, and if your toes are frozen, they are merely transitioning states. The humor of the situation and the irony of fighting for the co-prosperity sphere was lost on Hiroshi. His only defense against the existential horror was order and the discipline of the Imperial Army. When the train finally ground to a halt with a shudder that sounded like a dying philosophical debate, the doors were flung open, revealing a world painted in stark white, and gray snow lay in drifts. The air was not merely cold, it was antimatter cold that seemed to actively erase the heat from existence. A booming, exasperated voice filtered through layers of heavy wool and philosophical malaise greeted them. Privyet, and welcome to Camp 41B, or as I prefer to call it, the frozen uterus of the collective struggle. Step lively, parasites, for my poetic sensibilities decline precipitously after 0 degrees Celsius. The man stepping off the snowbank was Commandant Ivan Rostov, who was short, rotund, and dressed like a bear. He looked like a bear that had recently lost a wrestling match with a surplus army greatcoat. His mustache was magnificent, and his cheeks were permanently ruddy, while his eyes held a glazed look. He contemplated the futility of human existence, especially when dealing with foreign fascists. Form ranks now, Ivan bellowed, gesturing dramatically with a half-smoked cigarette that looked pitifully small. Within 10 minutes, the 14th Infantry Detachment had achieved something genuinely remarkable. Despite the freezing temperatures and the snowdrifts, they formed a double rank that passed inspection. They stood perfectly still, chests puffed slightly, trying desperately to project the image of soldiers. Ivan, sipping lukewarm tea from a chipped mug, slowly walked the line, observing them with curiosity. Fascinating, he muttered to his Deputy Sergeant Dmitri, a giant of a man whose face registered no emotion. They freeze like
I don't
statues.
understand their discipline.
So why
They
are
act
they
like
freezing
robots
like
in this
statues?
cold. It is disturbing.
Dimitri,
What are
are they
planning?
awaiting orders? Perhaps they are very cold, Commandant
they are
Dimitri
very cold.
suggested woodenly as Ivan stopped in front of Hiroshi. Cold, of course they are cold. This is Siberia. But they stand like little frozen pencils. Why? Hiroshi snapped an instantaneous salute, his gloved hand hitting his brow with military precision. Sir Corporal Tanaka Hiroshi, 14th Imperial Infantry Detachment. We await your assignment, Commandant. Ivan blinked slowly, asking about the assignment, and stating that they will be cutting trees. Communism needs timber, and I need a vacation. But why the salute? You are prisoners of the Soviet Union. The war is over, and you are no longer imperial tools, merely cogs in the machine of reconstruction. A cog must be polished, Sir Hiroshi announced, ignoring the slight tremor in his knees. If we are to contribute to the reconstruction, we must apply the discipline of the Emperor's forces. Ivan threw his head back and laughed a hacking, phlegmy sound that cleared his lungs and sent steam. Efficiency is a capitalist delusion.
Ideological purity.
Tanaka, we value ideological purity and the experience of suffering. Efficiency is for Ford factories here. We just need wood. So go to the barracks built by German prisoners. Your rations will be distributed twice daily. Now get inside and try not to organize your impending deaths. As the men shuffled toward the barracks, Hiroshi halted his unit and turned to Sato, the captain. Captain, with all respect, we must establish routine immediately, as the commandant is ideologically unsound. Sato agreed, saying, we will maintain military hierarchy, and I am still your captain, even as a lumberjack. First, we must secure the barracks, which were exactly as advertised, cramped, filthy, and without insulation. They smelled of damp wood, unwashed despair, and a faint lingering aroma of cheap Soviet tobacco. They were hopelessly overcrowded, forcing the men to sleep in tangled masses, as the source predicted. But Hiroshi saw opportunity, not squalor, and barked that Barracks Layout Order 1 Alpha is in effect. Rank will determine sleeping position. Captain Sato, you will occupy the space nearest the stove. Sergeants will form the next concentric ring, and privates will occupy the outer perimeter. You will rotate positions only upon formalized orders from the captain to ensure equitable distribution. The men, ingrained by years of obedience, immediately began the impossible task of organizing their huddle. The ensuing chaos was disciplined chaos. 80 men attempting to achieve a hierarchical pyramid of warmth. Kenji looked up from his freezing position on the outer wall, fearing his feet would become doorstops. Then you must generate more heat through rigorous self-criticism, Private Hiroshi declared. Think of the shame you brought upon your family by surrendering, and convert that shame into BTUs. It was in Hiroshi's mind the most logical response that organized starvation was superior to chaos. The next morning at the ungodly hour of 5:30 chosen by Hiroshi, they marched out into the taiga. Ivan and Dimitri watched the procession from the porch of the camp headquarters, sipping fiery black coffee.
Look at them.
Look,
Still
Dimitri
marching
Ivan
like
sighed,
automatons even
gesturing
here.
toward the line of Japanese prisoners who were marching in step. They are marching to cut trees. But why the marching? The trees are stationary and cannot run. Perhaps they fear a tactical retreat by the pine trees, Commandant Dimitri offered dryly. Nonsense.
Look at
This is the sickness of the uniform, Dimitri. They cannot perform a simple civilian task. The Japanese soldiers approached the first stretch of forest with the caution reserved for assaulting enemies. Axes were inspected, sharpened, and tested, while the logging zone was surveyed by Captain Sato. Sato used a frozen stick to draw a complicated, meaningless diagram in the snow. and announced plans. We will not simply fell the trees any common peasant can fell a tree. We will execute the trees. We will ensure that our work is geometrically impeccable, reflecting the unwavering spirit of the soldier. Hiroshi, nodding furiously, took command of the actual cutting team and set strict diameter rules. We will only fell trees with a trunk diameter deviation of less than 3% from the median average. The stump must be trimmed flush with the ground to minimize waste and present a perfect surface. The actual logging was slow, agonizingly meticulous, and brutally inefficient compared to a Soviet crew. The Japanese spent 3 hours on the first tree, mostly debating the optimal angle of the initial notch cut. But the true masterpiece of absurdity came after the cutting, when the unit began stacking the logs. Attention, log stacking protocol 4, beta. Hiroshi shouted, his voice cracking slightly from the coal. All logs must be aligned so that the cut ends form a perfectly planar surface without gaps. The gap between adjacent logs must not exceed 4 millimeters, and corners must be 90 degrees. The resulting log stack was a thing of terrifying frozen beauty, and it was so pristine and square. It looked less like firewood and more like a minimalist monument to bureaucratic commitment. They had created a single, perfect 6-meter cube of wood, consuming the labor of 50 men until midday. Ivan arrived shortly after noon, trudging through the snow, driven by the morbid curiosity of quotas. He stopped staring at the perfect log cube and ran a gloved hand over the impossibly smooth surface. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, betraying a mixture of annoyance and grudging artistic appreciation. Hiroshi snapped to attention and told him to behold the fruits of organized labor, called the efficiency cube. It represents 98% material utilization and demonstrates our unwavering commitment. Ivan pulled off his heavy glove, rubbed his temples, and told Tanaka to look around at the taiga. "This is 3 million square miles of frozen trees. I need tonnage and logs piled high, ugly, and fast. I do not need a piece of wood-based postmodern sculpture. So stop measuring gaps and pile the logs." "But sir, if the logs are perfectly aligned, they are easier to count, easier to transport and verify." "No, Tanaka. This is maximized systematic waste," Ivan roared, gesturing wildly at the vast, uncut forest. "You have spent half a day creating 1 cubic meter of wood that is too beautiful to burn. If you wanted to impress me with aesthetics, you should have written a sonnet about the crushing snow. But sir, if we do not measure the gaps, the stack will be structurally compromised and could collapse." Ivan felt a vein throb violently on his forehead, as he was surrounded by people who flew planes into ships. He turned to Dmitri, asking if the Germans did this, and Dmitri confirmed. They simply complained. Ivan stared at Hiroshi, who was now instructing Private Kenji to retrieve a confiscated protractor. "Tanaka, the Soviet state does not require aesthetically pleasing timber. It requires raw materials. I do not care if your log pile looks like a metaphor for imperial rigidity. Start over immediately. And if I see another protractor in this forest, I shall use it to calculate the ballistic trajectory of your skull." The confrontation in the taiga did little to dissuade Hiroshi, for Ivan was merely a poet assigned to a gulag. Hiroshi knew that true military discipline was tested not in battle, but in the mundane persistence of routine. This routine included the meticulous management of their meager rations provided by the Soviet Union. The food was designed to ensure survival just slightly above the point of revolutionary fervor. That evening, after a punishing day of logging, the men gathered for the evening meal by the barrel. Hiroshi stood by the ration barrel, holding a rusty ladle and a small, official-looking ledger. Attention soldiers. Due to the current supply instability, we are initiating Ration Control Protocol 2 Delta. Captain Sato's portion will remain unchanged, as command vitality is essential for our survival. Sergeants will receive 95% of the standard allotment, and privates will receive 90. Private Kenji, shivering next to the captain, raised a hand tentatively, asking why the differential. For discipline, Private Hiroshi declared triumphantly, "This is the system of organized starvation. If everyone starves equally, there is no incentive for rank cohesion. So we maintain a verifiable difference." Sato took his slightly larger bowl of soup, calling it a commendable application of bureaucratic theory. The philosophical difference between Japanese efficiency and Soviet brute force became the defining friction. Ivan found Hiroshi reviewing his ledgers later that night, under the dim glow of a sputtering kerosene lamp. "Tanaka, I have been reviewing your output, and you produce 1/10 the logs of the Kazakh unit. Your log piles look like they could survive a geological era. Why are you calculating caloric intake?" Commandant Hiroshi replied without looking up. "If we ensure the hierarchy of suffering, morale remains structured. If the structure collapses, morale enters a state of chaotic nihilism, which is counterproductive." Ivan stepped into the dim light, saying, "You talk as if you are optimizing a factory, but this is a prison. We do not care if you are structurally happy. We care if you are punished while contributing to the plan. But sir, the greatest punishment is not chaos, but the imposition of perfect order onto the impossible. To starve with structure is far more demoralizing than mere hunger. So we are applying psychological warfare." Ivan stared at the ceiling, wondering how he could possibly explain this phenomenon to Moscow. "You are making my job infinitely harder, Tanaka. As I told Moscow, I had a unit of broken, demoralized fascists. We are merely trying to convince you, Commandant, that organized starvation is superior to disorganized starvation. Fine, organize all you want, but if my quota is not met, I will use your perfect log cube as an outhouse." Ivan turned and vanished into the Siberian night, leaving Hiroshi to adjust his ledger, satisfied. The rigid military discipline and the geometrically precise log stacks kept the detachment's spirit intact. They were miserable cold and desperately hungry, but they were disciplined and focused on order. Then a rumor spread through the overcrowded barracks, chilling them more effectively than the cold. The monthly inspection whispered, Private Kenji rubbing his numb fingers. "It is tomorrow, the medical inspection." The men instantly stiffened, for the medical inspection was not about health, but about Nurse Olga. The Soviet medical staff performed comprehensive, full-body inspections designed to prevent typhus. For men steeped in the imperial tradition, showing one's naked body to a female stranger was torment. Hiroshi tried to maintain order, saying, "This is merely a bureaucratic necessity, and we will approach with dignity. We will ensure our bodily presentation is impeccable, regardless of the gender of the inspecting officer." But the fear was palpable, as it was not the cold that got them, but the clinical, impersonal Soviet gaze. Captain Sato lowered his voice, saying, "This is not war for war. We understood. But this is humiliation.
Show me your hand.
The shame of being stripped, shaven, and examined by a woman reduces us to cattle and negates discipline." The next morning, the 14th Detachment lined up shivering violently, not from the cold, but from dread. Ivan stood by the camp infirmary, looking even more miserable than usual, as he hated this part of the job. Next barked a voice from inside the small heated shack, and Private Kenji swallowed hard, his face pale. "Corporal, I volunteer to go first. I wish to face this shame head on," Kenji said, stepping forward. An excellent application of aggressive self-sacrifice. Private maintain impeccable posture even while naked. Kenji stepped inside, and a moment later, a high-pitched, choked sound of pure psychological trauma escaped. This was quickly followed by the dull scraping sound of a razor. And Hiroshi, waiting next in line, felt fear. He felt the rigid structure of his imposed discipline begin to crumble under the terrifying specter of soap. He knew that tomorrow the logging quotas would have to wait, as the men would be too busy with shame.